Can ketone supplements improve athletic performance and recovery? And for the longest time, I would have said yes, absolutely, because that's what I've been doing. I've been using ketone supplements to improve my performance in CrossFit workouts. But then I stumbled across a lot of research that might suggest otherwise, where, some of the research said, well, it actually doesn't, not only does it not help, it might actually negatively impact performance. I'm like, how is that? So for this video, I dug through all of the scientific research that I could find, look at what professional sports teams use ketones, because they probably know what they're doing, and then compare how all of that maps and matches with my hands-on anecdotal experience, as an hobby enthusiastic CrossFit athlete. So we'll go through all of that, and I'll explain how ketones can help, where they can help, where they might not help, and what is the difference between improving performance directly, like you take it, you go work out, you improve or you perform better, versus improving your recovery, which then in the long run can lead to improved performance, because the quicker you recover, the quicker you can work out again. And the more you do this without running yourself down, likely the better, you perform in the long run. And so we'll talk through all of it. But before we do, let's discuss real brief, if you're new to the topic, what are ketones and how do they work? Well, ketones are produced by the liver in the absence of dietary carbohydrates, generally speaking. So if you don't eat at all, if you fast for extended periods, meaning for 24 hours or longer, if you follow a low carbohydrate diet, like a ketogenic diet, or if you exercise over prolonged periods, especially in the absence of consuming carbohydrates, then your liver starts producing ketones as an alternative fuel source that is actually preferred by certain organs like the heart and the brain. They just thrive on ketones over glucose. I used to follow a ketogenic diet for several years, and I worked out intensively doing CrossFit 5-6 times a week, and I always performed well. So the idea that, doing certain high intensity type of workouts with ketones is kind of counterproductive didn't really add up to my experience. Now, here's the thing. There are different types of ketones that provide some of the benefits of a ketogenic diet without having to restrict your carbohydrate intake. And the three main types of ketone supplements that you can find out there are ketone salts. Those are the least expensive ones, I want to say. They're relatively inexpensive to produce, and they're typically bound to minerals like sodium and magnesium. However, they are less effective because metabolizing them and converting them into BHP, that main ketone body, is less effective as if you consume ketone esters. Ketone esters, on the other hand, they are more potent, they are more readily absorbed, they are quicker metabolized, and they typically raise blood ketone levels, P in particular, faster and in a more sustained manner. But they have a fairly strong taste, especially if they're unflavored. And I like to call them rocket fuel, because they make your hair on your chest grow. And then there is butanediol, and butanediol is the alcohol part of the ester. So if you cut the ester in half, more or less, then you end up with one of those halves is butanediol, one R13 butanediol. And that also gets converted into BHP by the liver. But generally speaking, for the purpose of performance improvement and improved recovery, most of the scientific studies out there use ketone esters. So for the sake of this video, whenever I say ketones or ketone supplements, I'm referring to esters and not salts or butanediol, which are less effective and not as well studied in that particular context. Now, let's talk about ketones and athletic performance. Can they directly improve performance? So you consume them, you go work out, and you perform better than you would otherwise. Well, again, here the studies are very much mixed. And probably a reason for that is because ketones are an aerobic fuel source that require oxygen for energy production. So in order for ketones to produce more ATP in your cells, in your mitochondria, they need oxygen. And what that means is that they won't work, or they won't produce energy in the form of ATP for anaerobic, meaning types of exercises that are not fueled by oxygen, like sprints, all out sprints, be it, running, be it cycling sprints, be it, it doesn't really matter how you sprint, but an all-out effort, a short kind of burst kind of type of activity. Some parts of CrossFit would match that pattern. They just don't work for that because there is no oxygen involved. Where they do work, however, and that's what studies have shown, is they work for endurance sports like long distance running, maybe marathon, ultra marathon, and cycling. And that's likely the reason why some professional cycling teams use ketones to support races as well as training. But even here, there are some mixed studies, and it looks like there are a couple of factors that influence whether or not ketones work in those contexts. And I think the most important factor is dosing. Based on the studies that I've seen that where they have not shown any performance improvement, those were typically studies where only small, relatively or comparatively small amounts of ketones were used. For example, like 0.35 grams per kilogram of body weight. Whereas the studies that have used 0.5 to 0.6 grams per kilogram of body weight have shown improvements. What type of improvements? Well, one study, for example, that was conducted with 95 elite level cyclists found that by consuming roughly 0.6 grams per kilogram of body weight of a ketone monoester, improved cycling performance by approximately 2%, meaning the athletes could ride 2% further than without ketone supplementation. And while that might not sound like a lot, well, if you're an elite athlete, those 2% can mean the difference between winning and losing. So it is very much a significant improvement for elite athletes. Now, for you and I, maybe, we go to the gym and, we work out, that's probably a rounding error and depends on a lot of other factors that might not necessarily be driven by ketone supplementation. But for elite level athletes, that makes very much a difference. And one of the reasons why scientists think that ketones can help in that context is because ketones produce more ATP per oxygen molecule than glucose. So for the same amount of oxygen that is available to the mitochondria, ketones produce more ATP. More ATP means more energy. Ketones can also reduce the production of lactate, and so that means reduced muscle fatigue. And so those two factors, and there are probably many others combined, can lead to a performance increase in types of exercises that rely on oxygen, meaning endurance, slower, steady pace kind of workouts, whereas with sprinting and with weightlifting and like high intensity explosive type of workouts, ketones might not work. We'll get to that might not when we talk about how I've been using ketones and the experience that I've had with them. Now, that example was based on ketone supplementation before the workout, before the race, before the challenge. And so you can do this either in combination with carbohydrates. Again, there are some studies that suggest if you add carbohydrates in addition to the ketones, you get an even better performance. But there are also studies that show just the ketones by themselves without anything else improve performance in those types of endurance exercises. Now, just to throw in here some anecdotal evidence, I typically compete in the Murph Challenge once a year. That is a CrossFit workout that includes a mile of. Everything is done with a 20-pound weight vest, but a mile run leading up to 100 pull-ups, 200 push-ups, 300 air squats, so all body weight movements, and then finish by another mile run. So it is kind of it's not a true high intensity type of workout. I would argue it's a lot more endurance, muscle endurance than high explosive stuff. And I've tested this back to back, meaning 1 year and then the second year. First year without ketones, second year with ketones. And I did this, and this is maybe an important nuance to that. I did both of those workouts at the end of a 48-hour fast. So I did not eat for 2 days, which means I was fully in ketosis. So my body was already producing ketones and predominantly using ketones as a form of energy. And then in the first year, I just did the workout like that. And then a year later, I did it again, but with consuming a significant amount of ketone esters. Delta G tactical is what I used, and the Delta G performance. And the time it took me to complete that workout improved by 10 whopping minutes year after year. And, even though, one could say, well, you probably have gotten fitter and whatnot. I'm 43 years old now. At the time I was 40 and 41, I think it was. At this stage of my life, I am more concerned about maintaining my fitness rather than improving it 15% year over year. So I don't think I was 15% fitter the second year. I likely was equally fit, just also based on my exercise regimen and my lifestyle. But the ketones made a significant difference in my performance. Again, I'm not elite level athlete. I don't scrape for 2% improvements, but it looks like in my case, those ketones improved my performance meaningfully by about 15% as far as the time it took me to complete the workout. Now, but again, it depends. The studies are somewhat mixed for using ketones to improve performance directly. But what about using ketones for recovery by consuming them after a workout or maybe before bedtime? Because ketones can also improve sleep. And if you sleep better, you recover better. So it's all kind of a cycle. And what studies have shown is that consuming ketones post-workout can reduce inflammation, can reduce muscle breakdown, and support faster recovery. So less inflammation and less muscle breakdown can lead to you being able to work out and push it again sooner. And that can have compound effects, not only on your overall recovery and on your reduced risk of injury, but also on your performance over time. Ketones have also shown to increase EPO levels, and that means enhanced oxygen delivery to muscle tissue. Again, improving your recovery by getting oxygenated blood into your muscles. That also comes with all the nutrients that your muscles need to repair and recover. It also promotes ketones, that is angiogenesis, and that is the creation of new blood vessels in your muscle tissue. And the more blood vessels you have, the more oxygen you can transport, again, leading to performance gains over time, but also the quicker you recover, because new blood vessels bring more oxygenated, nutrient-rich blood to your damaged muscle tissue that got damaged from the workout or from a race or what have you. And so you recover quicker and you improve your performance over time. The other thing is, I briefly mentioned it, supplementing with ketones before going to bed can improve deep sleep. And that is a crucial factor for muscle recovery and performance. It can also prevent disruptions, exercise-induced disruptions to REM sleep. So that means better mental performance, better cognitive performance. And that's also one thing that I should point out, even for workouts that are more high intensive in nature, like weightlifting or sprinting. Because your brain thrives on ketones, your cognitive performance, your mental clarity, your alertness, all of those things get improved. And so if you're in a workout and your brain is working better, I would argue that in itself can lead to improved performance. Because if you don't fatigue mentally, you've probably, if you're an athlete, be it a hobby or a pro athlete, you've probably run into a situation where you check out mentally or you give up mentally before your body gives up. And if you can get over that hump, if your brain works better, stays in the game, you can likely perform better, not because your body is working better, but because your brain tells your body to continue moving. And that's another indirect aspect. Also, just reducing mental fatigue. If you're in a long race that takes hours and hours, like, imagine you're riding the Tour de France, or you're in an ultra marathon race, or whatever the case, but triathlon, whatever, fatiguing mentally is a real thing. And once you fatigue mentally, your physical performance is likely going to go down the drain as well. Ketones can counter that effect and help you perform better, not directly, but indirectly. And my personal experience has been, I've been supplementing with ketones for, to improve my mental clarity, to improve my mental performance, as well as before working out. And I do mostly CrossFit. And, in CrossFit, most people think, well, it's a high intensity kind of, sport with weightlifting and fast movements, sprints, etc. But it's really a combination of various things. There are sometimes, it involves running. Sometimes it involves just long workouts, like chipper type of workouts that are not super high intense, that do require oxygen from a energy system perspective. And so there, ketones can very much help. Now, for a 100-meter sprint or for a 1 rep max, deadlift or whatever, maybe not so, except again, for the mental component. And so I think the combination of improving cognitive performance and improving any type of activity that requires oxygen to burn as a source of fuel or to produce energy, ketones can help. And I've noticed when I engage in intense CrossFit workouts, I kind of know what my body is capable of doing and how it can perform, what my limits are mentally as well as physically. And I've noticed a clear difference with ketones. I just perform better. And so I've been strategically using Delta G Tactical, Delta G Gold, which is like their coffee kind of cream. It's the same product, just a different packaging. But, in the morning, I add some to my coffee, makes it taste like Irish coffee a little bit. Before intense workouts, I just either mix it with water or, drink it, shoot it down like a shot. And I've noticed improvements in my performance on the day of exercise, but also improved recovery and improved sleep if I consume ketones closer to bedtime, or if maybe my workout happens to be in the late afternoon and it's somewhat closer to bedtime already, I can definitely tell the difference. It's worked for me, it's been working for me, and I've been using ketones for a very long time. I believe in their performance as well as recovery improving benefits. And combined with the studies that I've seen, it kind of makes sense. I do understand there are limitations. If you're a pure weightlifter and you're mentally on top of your game, maybe they're not going to help you much. But everything else considered, recovery, cognitive performance, and any type of exercise where there's oxygen involved, I firmly believe that ketones do work. Now, there are a couple of side effects and limitations we should also talk about. One is unflavored ketone esters have a fairly strong taste. They are like rocket fuel. So you either get something flavored, you flavor them yourself, you don't mind the taste, or you mix it with water or an electrolyte or whatever, and you're good. There's also a lot of research that's still evolving. There are a lot of all of the studies that I've seen, use different protocols, different dosing, different combinations of ketones and protein or ketones and carbohydrates. So there isn't really a clear picture yet that would allow us, the regular consumers, to say, okay, this is the recipe and this is going to work for me. You have to experiment a little bit with it. I think that's part of that makes it fun, using ketones, because I like self-experimentation, figure out what works for me and how, but it's not as cut and try. So the question is, should you be using ketones? Well, it depends a little bit. If you're an endurance athlete, I would say by all means, use them as a pre-workout supplement, with or without carbohydrates. If you're a strength or a CrossFit athlete, it's probably more beneficial for recovery and cognitive performance and sleep. So I would not maybe use them before a workout when it's high intensity, kind of, no endurance whatsoever. So there it can actually, or could potentially negatively impact your performance based on some of the studies that I've seen. If you're a casual athlete, I would say experiment to see the individual effects. Try out what works for you. How do you feel in your head? How do you feel physically? How do you sleep, by supplementing with ketones, and then go based on that. As I said, I use Delta G regularly. I've seen great results. I love it. I have a discount link for you down in the description if you want to check it out, if you want to give them a try. They are one of the highest, if not the highest quality ketone ester on the market. They are flavored and unflavored versions, so you can find something that works for you, that you like. With that, let me know, have you tried ketones? If so, what's your experience been? Have they worked? Have they not worked? Why do you use them? Cognitive performance, sleep improvement, or athletic performance, recovery? Let me know. I'd love to hear from you. Share this video with someone who could benefit from it. Subscribe, leave a comment, stick around, and I hope I'll see you in the next video.